and also get to know all of you a little bit. So I first of all welcome the undergraduate batch that's joining us this time. I'd like this to be a little bit interactive. So the students, if you have any questions in the middle, please go ahead and ask me. And maybe we can begin, I'll start with introducing myself, and maybe we can begin with getting to know the first years a little bit. So I'm just trying to figure if I can do this together more so that I can see all of you together in a classroom sort of an environment. So just bear with me. Yeah, I can only see myself.
Would you like us to turn on our cameras?
That would be nice. If you can turn on your cameras, then it's a little bit more intimate, right? I can get to know you guys, and then we can talk about empirical techniques in economics. That's a good idea if you can do that. Okay, I can see one person. Hi.
Hello.
That's great.
Hi.
That's great. Okay, hello. Let's just get everybody to turn on their cameras and sort of sit in the class together. And then we can proceed. Where is everybody else? Requesting all the students from BA Honors Economics first year to turn on their cameras and to join me in the classroom. Thank you, thank you. I can see more of you. Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, great. How large is this cohort? Do you have any idea? You've attended some of the other lectures in the Prestige series, right?
Ma'am, around
There were about
65 to
68
70
people in the
students.
last one.
Okay, great. So still waiting for some more. And I'm going to share my screen so that I can start my presentation. Oh. Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, great. So all right, I'm not sure if any. So all of you who've turned on your video, just mute yourself. Yes, thank you so much. So I'm going to begin with introducing myself, and then I'd like to get to know you guys. And I'm still requesting the rest of you first year students, please turn on your video so that we can get to know each other. All right, I'm going to start. So today we're going to talk about empirical techniques in economics, essentially what econometrics is and what can you do, or what do you learn in econometrics, right? So first of all, I'm Dr. Manini Ojha. I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and what area I work on. And if you have any questions regarding that, please feel free to ask me. So I joined JSGP 2 years back in the fall of 2019 after completing my PhD from Southern Methodist University in Dallas, in Texas. So I am an economist by training. Particularly, I'm an empirical economist, so I work with data in the fields of health, education, gender, especially interested in looking at how household decisions or individual decisions are made and how government policies might affect household and individual decisions. Lately, I've been working a little bit in the field of economics of households, specifically, so looking at domestic violence and interpersonal violence a little bit. And largely this comes under the umbrella of development economics, okay? But my work is mostly empirical development economics. So do you understand what I mean by empirical when I say empirical? Anyone? Yes, no? You're free to unmute yourself at any point and talk to me. All right. So empirical, when I say empirical, I mean working with data, right? As I said, I'm going to be talking about econometrics. So econometrics is something that is sort of a skill or a tool that you learn to be able to apply all of your theory that you learn and mix it with data and it'll help you answer the questions that you're looking to answer, right? So a little bit more about my background. Before going for my PhD, so I completed my PhD in 2018 and joined JSGP. Before that, I was teaching at LSR, Lady Shri Ram College, for 3 years. So I taught undergraduate students economics for 3 years. There, before that, I finished my master's from JNU, and I've done my undergrad from Delhi University, SRCC. Yeah. And yeah, I've really enjoyed my time here at JSGP for the last 2 years. I've had quite a lot of interactions with the second and the third year undergraduate students. So I start teaching you in your second year because the course that I teach, which is econometrics, is something that you will learn in the fall of 2021. So that's when you start learning econometrics after you've done your basic first and second semester courses. Right, so we've had a lot of fun learning this course. I've got some good responses, especially for students who are interested in working with numbers or data. This seems to be something that is of interest. There's a lot of scope of using econometric techniques just for your jobs or even your internships and anything in future. There's a lot of demand for it, okay? So it's a little bit of a technical course. And it's something which is completely new to you, so it might take some time getting used to it. But still, I'll give you an overview of what one does in econometrics. What is econometrics? How do you define it? Or how do you understand the concept, right? So before I go ahead, all of you guys who have your videos turned on, maybe one by one, you can tell me who you are. And I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, about 13 students who have turned their cameras on. Can you just tell me what your, one by one, what your interests are, what you're looking forward to learning in the BA Economics program? So let's start with the row where I'm sitting. The gentleman to my left. You want to start? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, ma'am, my name is Achyut. I'm I did economics in my 11th and 12th grade, like without math.
Okay.
So I like the subject. I mean, like I learned demand and supply, and I like the subject because of that. It started with that, and then I like the subject. So that's the reason I decided to learn economics.
That's great. That's great. So you like the subject in general, and you're looking
Yeah.
forward to learning more about demand and supplies. Okay. You must have done micro and macroeconomics, right?
Yeah, like initially I started with that with those two chapters, and then I started liking the subject because of that, and then towards like I like started liking macro too.
Okay, great, great. So I work in the area of microeconomics, all right? So I'm working in the area of micro. I don't do work in the macro field. And even within micro, I use data to answer the questions that are of interest, right? Okay, next person. Some of you are disappearing. Please don't leave. Let's have a conversation for 1 hour. Get to know each other. So please don't disappear from the conversation. All right. And the next person, there was a lady sitting next to me, but now she's not there.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, would it be possible to take our names? Because I don't think everyone can see who's next to who, ma'am.
Okay. I'm not sure. Okay. How do I get to know who's who? I don't think I can get to know that.
You can just put the names. I guess that'll be better.
Okay. Is Achyut here?
Ma'am,
Aditya?
Yes, ma'am.
You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Agastya. I graduated from the Doom School. I studied economics in my 11th and 12th from the IB course. So I really figured out how economics fits into stuff like English and history and how it has an impact on everything.
Okay.
My main interest in economics lies in the development economics, but I also do enjoy macro and macro.
Okay, great, great. Agastya?
Yes, ma'am?
Where is Agastya?
Yeah, that's me.
That you're Agastya. Okay, I thought you were Aditya. All right, then Akash. So I don't think all of you are, all the participants in the class are actually students. So I'm not sure who is a student and who is not a student. So maybe this is not a good idea. I don't think I can. I'll get to know all of you one by one. Uh, this is difficult. So I'll just go ahead. I'll just go ahead with my presentation. Is that all right? Somebody has their hands raised. Okay. Yes, someone has a question. Okay. All right. I guess not. So I'm just going to go ahead. Let's talk about what econometrics is. Do you have any idea of what econometrics is? Have you heard of the word? Have you heard of the subject?
I think it's something with economics and trigonometry. I'm not sure.
Okay. Anybody else?
Ma'am, the study of data with relation to economics.
Okay. All right. Good. Both of you, you're not completely off. It's not trigonometry, but it's econometrics is essentially, I would say, a mixture of economic theory, statistical tools, and a little bit of mathematics. So it's a confluence of all three things put together. All right. So that's what econometrics is. Now you will be using some math in it. You will be using some statistics in it. So I'm guessing you've done some statistics in your 11th and 12th, yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So let me begin with defining econometrics to you, and then we'll go ahead and see what all you can learn in it, okay? And how useful data is to address these wide range of questions that arise in the real world, or something that you might be interested in knowing more about, right? So econometrics, the fathers of econometrics are these two guys, all right? Frisch and Habermas, both of them are Nobel Prize winners. And the term econometrics is attributed to this guy here who looks much happier than this sad person. Even though
Ma'am,
he,
ma'am, I'm
yes.
not able to see the screen.
Oh, you're not able to see the screen. Okay.
Yeah, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for telling me. Let's see if I can. Can you see the screen now?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Okay.
I can do it.
So when I magnify it, for some reason you're not able to see it. But right now you're able to see it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so again, these are the two pictures. These are the two guys. Uh, the they're sort of known as the fathers of econometrics, and the term is attributed to Frisch here, who's looking much happier than Havelmo, who's not really looking very happy with his achievements. Uh, so Havelmo, the unhappy economist, states that the method of econometric research typically aims at a conjunction of economic theory and measurements using the theory as well as techniques of statistical inference, sort of act like a bridge pair, all right? So as I said, it's a mix of theory, mathematics, and statistical techniques, right? And Frisch in 1933 published that econometrics is by no means the same as economic statistics. Okay, so you know statistics, but it's not really statistics. It is not identical to what we call general economic theory, right? Although a considerable portion of the theory definitely has some quantitative character, nor should econometrics be taken as synonymous with the application of mathematics to economics. All right, so it's neither statistics nor completely mathematics nor completely economic theory. Okay. Experience has shown that each of these three viewpoints, that of statistics, economic theory, and mathematics, is a necessary but not itself a sufficient condition for understanding uh, relationships between variables in modern economic life. So it's actually the unification of all of these three that is powerful, and it is this unification that constitutes econometrics, right? So that typically is how you define, you know, the realm in which econometrics falls. But what do we learn in this subject, right? What we are going to be starting with, what you're going to start with in your second year is learning more about how things are related with each other, right? Relationship between different variables. Say you think of an X and Y, right? So one of you told me that you've learned about demand and supply. So, you know, you might be interested in knowing how price and quantity are related, right? Or you might be interested in very simple terms, you might be interested in knowing how rain and how flowers bloom are related. So any relationship between two variables or different variables can be studied using econometric techniques, right? So if you think about X and Y, how are they related to each other? Which one is the cause? Which one is the effect, right? Here, this little picture shows that, you know, rainfall causes flowers to bloom. So this is sort of like showing you the relationship between what rainfall and how flowers are affected by good weather or rain or water, etc. Right? So similarly, you might be interested in knowing about how a particular government policy affects, um, you know, household decisions, or how you studying economics honors will affect your salary in future. Any other thing, anything else that you would want to you might be interested in knowing, any question that you might have in mind, you can use econometric techniques to actually see how these the variables are related to each other. So if you have any questions, anybody with any particular question about, that might be of interest to you, you can throw out, you can come up with some ideas about what, an X and Y. Think of anything that you're interested in.
Ma'am, this is a little unrelated to this, but can econometrics help you answer a question where there are more than two variables?
Yes. Yes. So we will begin with just two variables, and then we'll start including more and more variables to see if there are other variables. So it's not necessary that it's just rainfall that actually causes flowers to bloom in this photograph, right? There could be other reasons for why flowers bloom. So econometric models actually help you incorporate many such variables into the model to be able to tell you what the effect is on a particular phenomenon or event or any variable that you have in mind. So it's not necessary that it is limited to just two variables. Good question. All right. So typically your theory or your common knowledge or your intuition may tell you that X causes Y, right? Rainfall causes flowers to bloom, for example. Or give me any example of how X could cause Y. So you can think of any X and any Y. So can you tell me, give me an example of a relationship between two variables? Any one of you?
Hi, good morning. So when you ask this question, you refer to a specific economic variable or any variable?
No, just think of anything of interest to you.
Okay, so
Yeah.
if there's anything that interests me other than economics is I think has to be motorsports and Formula One racing. So I think the variables in that can be the how the temperature of the track can actually impact the tire degradation that cars feel or have that impact on. So it has a direct relationship. So maybe that can also come under econometrics because there's an X and a Y and both are interrelated.
True. That's a very good example, and it can definitely you can answer the question that you have in mind using econometric techniques, right? So that's the idea. It's you can utilize it in various ways in different fields. So there's nothing limiting you to use it only in the economic sense. So if you're interested in motorsports, if you're interested in other sports, if you're interested in more cultural things, you can actually still answer the questions you have in mind using these techniques. The only catch is, yes.
Ma'am, sometimes the variables are not directly related as the motorsport example. Like sometimes how the lockdown has caused a spike in the gaming industry.
Right. So
So
that's right. So it's not necessary that the variables be so there's definitely going to be some effect. So the lockdown has had some effect. You believe the lockdown has had some effect on the gaming industry, right?
yes, ma'am.
Right? You can still figure out using econometric techniques what the effect is. Right? Now the thing is, the idea I'm trying to get at is theory or intuition or common knowledge will tell you that lockdown has affected the gaming industry in so and so way, or price affects quantity in this manner, or the example the gentleman gave about the motorsport industry. But there might not be such a direct relationship, as you said. And it's just saying that X causes Y might be a simplification of reality, because in actual fact, the relationship might not be exact, right? It might not be direct, as you said. So econometrics actually helps you incorporate for all of these other random things that might be happening along with the lockdown. So lockdown may have affected something else, and that may have affected your outcome of interest, right? So we are able to incorporate for these random elements in the model as well using econometric techniques, And when I say these random elements, I mean something which has sort of a probabilistic description. We call it a stochastic elements. Things that you're able to see and determine are the deterministic part of the models that you learn, and things you're not able to observe that easily that might have some probabilistic nature are the stochastic elements. So econometrics actually helps you incorporate for a lot of things in the model to be able to answer your question of interest. All right. And that's basically driving home the point what you said, that might not be a very direct effect, right? By just saying that lockdown led to this, might led to changes in the gaming industry. I mean, it's possible. We don't know what the effect is, but we can figure out what the effect is using the methods that we learn in econometrics, because econometric models help you incorporate for a lot of other factors that might be going in this whole process. Yes.
Ma'am, so for like one cause, you can have different effects. Like there can be a number of effects, or like for one cause, you'll have one effect.
So typically the way you write econometrics models are in form of an equation, right? So on your left-hand side, there is going to be one variable, y, and on your right-hand side, there are going to be multiple x's. So many things that might be leading to an effect on y. So now, if you're thinking about multiple effects, that will amount to having several different y's, right? So you can actually have several different econometric models looking at the different effects. So we'll go ahead and learn all of that, but since I don't want to make it very mathematical today, it's just the starting. I just want you to know get hold of the concept, right? When you finish your first course in mathematics and statistics, and when you come to your second year, that's when you're going to make it more formal, right? Any other questions before I go ahead?
Ma'am, I have a question. It's pertaining to the nature of the variables. For example, if you look at the Phillips curve, it basically shows the relationship between inflation and unemployment. But there's several different types of inflation, which causes so what my question is, can econometrics help determine the nature of the variable on like what effect it has?
The nature of the variable, well, it depends on how you're defining the variable and what kind of definition you're actually incorporating into the model. So you can write your econometric model formally as a mathematical equation, but to able to really determine the relationship, you need to have data to answer these questions. Right now, a data set is going to have information about different variables, and these different variables are going to be defined a certain way, right? So maybe the nature of the variables already, what you're going to be incorporating into the model to answer your question is already going to be defined in this particular way from the data you've gone and you're using to answer this question, or if you want more freedom to use econometric techniques, then you can decide to be a primary researcher where you go ahead and collect data on your own, right? So then you have the freedom to be able to define the variable the way you want it. So that's, yeah.
So ma'am, like you are into microeconomics and econometrics as well. So you must have read the reports of rise of domestic violence during the lockdown period.
Mm-hmm.
Then using that example, can you tell us how are the variables defined, and like when there is not a direct correlation?
So that's the thing. It might not be very apparent that there is a direct correlation between lockdown and domestic violence, the incidence of domestic violence. But when I take this question to data, so suppose I get access to some data that is already collected by the government, right? And actually, let me go ahead a little bit, and then I can talk about what are the different kinds of data that is available and how you can use these data to answer a question like domestic violence, or any other questions that might arise. All right. So let me just sort of go ahead and show you what all you can learn in econometrics, and then we'll come to data and how the variables are defined. And as a researcher, what are the variables that I want to include in my question or in my exercise? Is that fine?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So one thing is that you're able to learn relationships, you're able to answer questions about how variables are related to each other, X and Y. Secondly, econometric techniques can also be used to test simple economic theories that you have already learned. So theory of demand or the Phillips curve and anything that you've already learned. Econometric techniques can be used to answer those questions as long as you have access to the right kind of data to answer that question. So you might be interested in how business cycles work, how individual decisions are made. All of these questions can be answered. Thirdly, and very interestingly, and since you're going to be part of the School of Government and Public Policy, you might be interested in knowing how government policies affect people, affect households. So maybe how a job training program affects an individual's salary in future. Can you give me examples of other government policies? Prominent Government of India policies?
Demonetization affecting the rural economy.
Right, so demonetization, then there, anybody else?
Ma'am, Digital India.
Digital India's effect on what? What are you interested in?
Ma'am, it has a major impact on the rural environment, rural areas, so we could talk about that.
Okay.
And maybe
Yes,
how online classes have caused a digital divide.
that's very true. That's correct. So these things are very interesting to answer, right? It's just that sometimes you are limited by the data that you have access to. You know, if there is good data, you can really answer any of these questions. So essentially, as a researcher, we always struggle with having access to good data because there's so many interesting questions as all of you are throwing at me. I just wish we had all sorts of data. It's just a little difficult to get access to different kinds. But anyway, econometrics helps you learn about relationship between variables. You can find out how policies are affecting different outcomes of interest that you've told me. You can also test economic theories using econometrics. All right. So these are largely three broad areas in which I'm going to club them. Econometric techniques when you start the course with me. So eventually when you're doing your econometric analysis, what econometric analysis helps you do is it helps you make empirical judgments. So evidence-based judgments, data judgments, right? Data-based judgments. Nothing you do in econometrics is ever moral judgment, all right? You never make any moral judgments. You always let the data speak to you. So you might have a question of interest in mind. How has the lockdown affected the gaming industry? Let's say that's the question, right? You might have some opinion of your own, but you keep that aside. You go take this question to the data, let the numbers speak to you. You apply your econometric models to the data, let the numbers speak to you, and let the data speak to you and tell you what the effect has been. Maybe it is a zero effect, maybe it is a negative effect, maybe it is a positive effect. But you make your judgments only based on these evidences, right? You don't make any moral judgments in this field. So it has to be extremely clinical in nature, right? You let empirical analysis, empirical economists, they let data speak to them. They use data to test all sorts of theories or estimate relationships between variables. Is that all right? Do you follow that? Okay, great. Now coming to data. What kind of data do you have? How can you segregate data into different kinds of data? So data can be experimental data or non-experimental data. Now, one of you asked me about the nature of a variable or how that is defined, right? I'm quite disappointed. A lot of you have left the classroom. If you're still around, please come back. We're going to be addressing some of your questions that you had asked. Some of the people who actually left the classroom, please come back. We're going to be addressing your questions now, since I've come to the data section. So data essentially can be experimental data or non-experimental data. Okay. When I say experimental data, that means if you are actually the primary researcher and you go ahead and conduct an experiment in a lab or a field and you collect the data yourself, right? So when you're actually collecting data yourself, you go ahead and probably, how will you go about collecting data yourself? Or if you have a question in mind and you want to take that to the field, how would you collect data? Especially one of you asked me about the nature of variables and how they are defined. If you want some freedom in or if you want a variable to be defined in an exact manner that you have, you want to include in the model, you might want to go ahead and collect data yourself, right? But how do you collect data?
By surveys.
By surveys, so by conducting surveys. So if you've decided that you're going to be the primary researcher, you're going to go ahead and do an experiment in the field or the lab, you will probably make a questionnaire first of all, with a list of questions and go, decide these are going to be my subjects and I'm going to go to each one of these people and ask these following questions. But when you're deciding on how to make the questionnaire, that's when you have to be very careful about designing the questionnaire, because that's when you are defining the variables the way you want them to be defined, right? So if I want to see whether, if I want to conduct an experiment with this cohort, right, of first year students who are entering JSGP to pursue their undergrad in economics, right? If I do a simple experiment or a game and I divide your class into two, right? One half of the class gets, say, 100 rupees per student and the other half of the class does not, right? And I want to see how giving you cash affects something like attendance in my class, right? So something as simple as that. If I give you money, will that give you more incentive to come and attend my classes, right? So I'm probably going to divide the class into two and be like, this group I'm not going to give any money to, this group I'm going to give some money to. So that I'm able to see whether the group that I gave money to, did they have more incentive to come and attend my classes? So these are the kind of things that you can do as a primary researcher. If you're interested in knowing more about the gaming, the motorsport industry, I think it's going to be a little more difficult to go ahead and conduct a primary, sort of survey. But one can always look at data that is not experimental, so non-experimental data. Data that is where you're the secondary researcher. So data that's already available. So now, for example, Government of India conducts several surveys. We have the census, which is the largest survey, right? So that has information about the population, all individuals. We have several other data sources. Do you know about other data sources that come from the Government of India?
Like the literacy rate or
the literacy rates. You have the National Sample Survey, which also conducts. So that has information about employment, unemployment, has information about consumption, expenditure. So you can get information from the government about several things, even domestic violence. There is another data set available for India called the India Human Development Survey, where you have information at the individual and household level for many things, how they're spending their money, where are the people employed, what are their educational backgrounds, what are their parents' educational backgrounds. So sometimes when it's not possible for you to conduct primary research yourself, you can always go and take these secondary data sets that are credible, provided by the government, use those data sets to answer the questions that you have in mind, right? Now, coming back to the question about whether lockdown affected in domestic violence, right? So there are reports out there where how are they making these judgments? They're making these judgments based on data on intimate partner violence or domestic violence taking place in the household before lockdown and after lockdown. So there is a period, sort of a cutoff in between. They're comparing what happened before with what happened, with how much was the incidence of domestic violence before the lockdown took place with what is the incidence of domestic violence after the lockdown. So you can actually, I mean, I understand right now it's a little bit abstract, what I'm telling you, but when we start writing the formal model, you'll be able to see how an X affects Y. So X being the lockdown here, Y being the domestic violence within the household, right? So when you write it down in a formal econometric model, you'll be able to see how X is causing an effect on Y, right? All right.
I have a question. You said that data can be separated into two parts, right? So isn't this basically just statistics and parameters? For example, the parameter, for example, non-experimental data. It's stuff like government surveys, it really takes the entire country's data, as opposed to experimental, where it takes only a portion of. So my question is,
I think you're getting at something called, I think your question has to do with whether this data is representative or non-representative of the population. So when government conducts the surveys, they take a really large representative sample of the total population of India so that the data is actually representative of the population. They can't, I mean, a survey, unless and until it's a census where everybody is actually tracked, most surveys are not going to be able to give you information about every person in the country. They're going to look at a representative sample, and this is something that you will learn in your statistics courses, the first and the second statistics courses. You'll take a representative sample of the country and you will collect data about these people and take that as a representative data set to answer the questions. Whereas when you are
urban and rural.
Sorry? Both urban and rural. Yeah. Both urban and rural, also sort of equally divided within the regions of India, so that you're able to take north, south, east, west. So it has to be representative in the true sense, not just region or area wise, but also when surveys are designed, a lot of things are taken into account. So it's truly representative in nature, right? Whereas in a primary research, right, whereas say experimental research, where you have decided to conduct an experiment in a lab, of course you're not going to have so many people in your experiment. You just cannot, right? But you still try to get a bunch of people who are sort of representative, right? So if I have a question about economics honors students, I'm going to take the entire cohort of economics honors students as my subject group, right, as my data set, and of course be able to make some empirical judgments based on my econometric exercise. The question comes down to how, and this is a constant debate that is sort of on, about the external validity of the results that you find. How valid are these results that you are drawing out of, this, just looking at this cohort, how valid are they for the rest of the population, right? So this is always an ongoing debate. Sorry?
Because it's like a mini model.
Right, it's a mini model. Yeah, it's a mini model. It's looking at a particular set of people from a particular background, right? So sometimes it gets difficult to generalize the results that you find for the entire country. I can't generalize the result that I find for this cohort of economics honors students for the rest of the country, right? You come from different backgrounds. So econometric methods will help you figure out how to account for these different backgrounds of every individual as well. To what extent are you going to be able to generalize your results, right? So all of these nuances you'll get to know once you start learning the course more and more. Okay. Right. Moving on. Now I'm just so I kind of gave you an overview of how to define econometrics and what you learn in it, right? Um, what all did I say? You can learn about relationship between variables. You can test some theories that are already that you've already learned about. You can also see how government policies affect decisions, individual household level, at the district level, the state level, or the country, and so on. Right? Uh, so I'm just going to sort of, and to all of this, you need numbers, you need data. So I'm just going to sort of put everything together and tell you how econometric research actually takes place, right? I'm not going to go into the formal modeling or anything. I just want to sort of help you understand visually what goes into an econometric modeling technique or an empirical analysis. So first, what you'll do is you'll formulate an interesting question in mind, and many of you have given me some very, very interesting questions. So formulate an interesting question in mind, anything that's interesting to you. Then you construct a formal economic model, right? This is usually quite useful when you're testing theories. Suppose you don't have an economic model and you're not able to formulate an economic model, rely on your intuition for it, okay? So, as one of the gentlemen said, what is the effect of the lockdown on domestic violence, right? And it might be difficult for you to put it in an economic model, but at least you know intuitively that there might be an effect in so and so manner, right? So rely on your intuition or reasoning to be able to say this might be the effect, right? Then what you do is you take it to an econometric model, right? Formally sort of writing it in an equation setting, which again you will learn in your second year, but imagine it's going to be sort of like an equation where y is your outcome, so domestic violence is your outcome, and your right hand side you have several other variables, one of which is going to be the lockdown, right? So you'll take it to the econometric model. Then you're going to state a hypothesis of your interest, right? So your question was, how does lockdown affect domestic violence, right? What is the hypothesis? What do you think the hypothesis would be? Or for most of the students sitting here, what do you hypothesize about this relationship between the lockdown and domestic violence?
I mean, speaking on general terms, it would rise, right? Like, because the fact that more people, for someone who's uncomfortable living in that environment that they've been put in, now they have to spend a great amount of time over there. And apart from that, it's like for two people who don't feel comfortable being with each other, and now the fact that they're put into the same room to handle each other, that kind of insinuates the rise in domestic violence.
Right, excellent. So you've been able to intuitively think about, a relationship exists. You learn how to write it in an econometric model, and you also have some hypothesis, right? And the hypothesis right now is that being in the lockdown probably makes people uncomfortable, especially people who are, uncomfortable living in the same limited space, and maybe that has a positive effect on domestic violence in the sense that domestic violence increases. Right?
I mean,
So
it could
maybe
have been also due to unemployment, which caused distress, and then in turn turned into a secondary cause of domestic violence.
absolutely. So you can actually see the effect of lockdown on unemployment as well, and see whether unemployment is causing, effects on domestic violence, or you can incorporate all the variables in the same model and see for people who are employed whether the lockdown has had an effect on the domestic violence. For people who are unemployed, whether the lockdown has had an effect on domestic violence. So there are a lot of interesting things that you can do. So all of you have some hypothesis about it, right? That maybe X is affecting Y in a positive way, or or a negative way, or has no effect. So you kind of state this hypothesis of interest in terms of some unknown parameters. Now, I will go ahead and talk about unknown parameters and variables and how you write all of that in a model again at a later stage. Today is just about introducing you to how to conduct research. So you've formulated an interesting question, you've thought about the intuition, you take it to a formal econometric model, have a hypothesis of interest, then what do? You obtain the relevant data for the analysis, conduct the research, do the exercise, econometric exercise, and estimate the more parameters or try to find out how the relationship, what is the relationship between the x in question and the y in question, and test this hypothesis, all right? So simply put, these are the steps that are involved in econometric research, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'm just sort of going to end with one thing that I want you to keep in mind, that econometric analysis begins where economic theory concludes, all right? So economic theory is going to tell you many things, right? To be able to empirically test it, you'll need data, right? So take the theory to the data and test it, right? See what the data is actually telling you. Yeah? So this is what you do in econometrics, typically, right? Now, you will need some practice of calculus, right? You will need statistical tools for before starting the course in econometrics. So these are sort of prerequisites to start learning econometrics. And that's why the course, the BA Honors Economics course, is designed as doing Stats 1 and Stats 2 in your first and second semester, and then going ahead to do econometrics. And I think in your first semester, you also have mathematics, or you've already had
Yes, ma'am.
mathematics?
We have mathematics
Ma'am,
one.
we have mathematics.
Yeah. So all these two things are definitely required for you to be able to build formal econometric models, right? And you'll try to get comfortable with statistics when you're learning it. So while you're starting your courses in statistics, I would say be as alert as possible, ask as many questions, because you want to be very comfortable with stats before you come to econometrics, right? Because I'm not going to go over stats once you start econometrics. We'll just start with econometrics. But you definitely need to know basic statistics for it. Okay? So I can, if you want, I can share the slide that I just, the presentation with you with this first year batch. I have the references provided. So if you're interested in reading up a little more, just out of interest, please be my guest. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask me. Does this sort of excite you a little bit, that, what you might be able to do with econometric techniques and what data can help you do? You see, you have so many interesting, just right now you've given me 4 or 5 very interesting questions. If you find the right data for it, one can do a lot.
Oh, is there some amount of data science that also comes into question when you're doing econometrics?
Yes, ma'am, because now that we have softwares and everything, we won't just rely on mathematics and statistics.
No, of course not. So the way the course is designed is that I will introduce you to the formal econometric methods, but I will also, see, as an empirical researcher, I myself use some softwares to be able to answer my questions. So I use something called Stata, right? This is a software which most empirical economists use, Stata, and there's an open source software also called R. You must have heard of R. Right?
Yes,
so a lot of economists use both Stata and R. I use Stata, so I'll also start introducing you to this particular software so that you can take the theory, you can take the methods that you've learned in class, on paper, on board, and apply it to actual data set that you have. So we might be writing X and Y on the board and seeing what the econometric model looks like, but what are those X and Y? Those variables are variables in the data set, right? So we'll take the data set, put it in the software, and start doing basic, you'll learn basics of Stata as well with me. Maybe some of you have already had experience with working on Excel.
Yeah.
Right? So you know a little bit of Excel. So you can at least imagine a data set in Excel, right? Imagine the same thing but on a different software, and which already incorporates for a lot of econometric models. So you'll definitely be learning Stata as well in your second year. If not in the first econometrics course, definitely in the second econometrics course, because a lot of the first econometrics course, which is in the fall of 2021, that will be the building blocks of econometrics that you need to be aware of before taking it to the data. Does that make sense? Does that sound good?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, I have a question. You had previously mentioned that before we get into research and making our model, we rely on our intuition. We have certain level of expectations. So does that to some degree narrow or give us a sort of a biased result? Does that affect our result in a?
Shouldn't. You might have some idea in your mind that this is the way X is going to affect Y. But as I said, refrain from making moral judgments, right? You might have an idea, but your ideas might be completely trashed by the data. Maybe the data tells you completely different answers, right? But that's what the answer is, right? So try to separate moral judgments and clinical judgments. So make sure when you're doing research in future, you try to remain as clinical as possible, okay? As empirical as possible, as evidence-based as possible. So you can always write as a researcher that despite the expectation that X should have affected Y in a particular manner, the data tells us that so and so is happening, and maybe the reasons for so and so happening are, and then you start thinking about why this could be happening, even though you expected the opposite sort of an effect.
How often does data get manufactured instead of searching from, let's say, Google? So, for example, I have an idea and it's not yet been established, or there isn't much of a data study over it. So, does that allow for me to run out surveys in multiple forms where people can understand the idea and give their reply on that?
See, there's nothing stopping you from doing a primary personal research. It's just about whether you'll be able to do it, right? A lot of times people want to roll out surveys, but there are high number of non-responses. People don't respond to surveys. You send them emails with questionnaires, people will not respond to it. So these kind of problems always remain. These are the practical problems with data. Also with available data, there might be a lot of, as you said, a lot of times data is manufactured. You don't know whether you can trust it. Even with data coming from government sources, there might be measurement error in the data. The way the variables have been measured, there might be some measurement error in it. So hopefully econometric techniques, and these are very good questions, but these are detailed nuances, and hopefully econometric techniques will help you solve some of them, some of the problems, like at least measurement error, the way there might be a lot of degree in variability, or of variability in the way a particular variable is defined. You might be able to at least account for errors there, but if you feel the data that is available is, there are high chances of it being manufactured, then maybe you should look at another data source, or go ahead and conduct your own primary research. That is a little challenging. As I said, a lot of times people don't respond, but there's nothing stopping you from it.
Yeah, but like there are times where, for example, you get different sorts of data from different, let's say, sources. So how do you trust the reliability of the source? So, for example, like if I'm getting a data from Wall Street Journal and from New York Times, so like, and it varies by huge matters. So how do I
So these are pretty reliable sources. A Wall Street Journal or a New York Times, they are pretty reliable sources. And anytime you do any exercise, you're anyway going to quote and write about. There's going to be a big section on data that you describe that this is where my data comes from. right? So first of all, it should be a reliable source, and a Wall Street Journal or a New York Times are reliable. Or if you're going to any government data sets, they're all reliable, right? Because the government is coming out with it. So there's, to the extent that the government comes out with correct data, it is reliable. Nobody is going to defunct your exercise saying that these are not reliable sources. Nobody's going to come and say, oh, Wall Street Journal or New York Times is not reliable. It's just that you have to state where your data is coming from, right? So that they are also held accountable for the results that you are finding from their data sources. So you kind of make it very explicit. But of course, I mean, this is an ongoing debate about reliability of data and all of that. That always remains. But you just do the best you can, given the resources you have. So I'm not going to be able to tell you this is the answer. This is the ultimate truth, in my course. Econometric techniques, empirical analysis is never going to help you get to the ultimate truth. It's only going to get you to the best possible outcome given the resources that you're working with. Any other questions, guys?
Ma'am, if in case I want to pursue data analytics after a BA, so is it possible that I can do with a BA in Eco, or should I have a BA in data analytics too?
Well, you can pursue data analysis in future with the BA honors in economics, but you'll have to have a lot of experience with specific data analytics courses and a lot of software. So economics will give you a general sort of learning in all different fields of economics BA honors, right? But you can always do some courses on the side which give you more experience of working with softwares, and then go ahead and pursue it, right? But I mean, that's 3 years later. So keep your mind open, keep your options open. A lot of things change in the course of your bachelor's also. So keep having conversations with your professors, and things evolve all the time. There might be opportunities to do courses along with your BA honors economics online anyway. So many things are available. So my personal advice is you start your undergraduate in economics, but keep an open mind about everything that you're learning, right? Your first and your second year will go into trying to figure out what you find more interesting, I think. By second semester of your second year, you'll have a better idea of what you're more interested in. Yes, one of the guys had a question.
Ma'am, actually, I wanted to ask if you're aware of the actuarial sciences.
No, unfortunately, I won't be able to help you there. You'll need an actuary to be able to. I'm not an expert. Sorry. Any other questions before I end? I think we're over time. Okay, great. Really good talking to you. You had some very, very interesting questions for me, and I look forward to teaching you in your next year. Till then, try to be very alert in your statistics courses, right? Try to get comfortable with it. Ask questions. Please ask questions if you're not understanding, because it's normal to not understand what's going on. When I started my undergrad, I was completely lost as well. So just don't be scared to ask questions, all right? So go ahead and ask questions to whoever's teaching your statistics. Try to get comfortable with calculus. Basic calculus is required. And I'll see you in fall of 2021 more intimately in a classroom setting, hopefully. I understand this is a very, very disturbing time. Everything has to happen online, but I'm sure we'll all adapt to it as we are doing, because humans are capable of doing that. Okay? All right, guys, good luck and really enjoy your first year.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yep.
Thank you, ma'am.
Really nice talking to you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.